You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact. Yeah, it is still season 5. Why do you ask? I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time we are talking about The Outcast. It was written by Jerry Taylor, directed by Robert Shearer, and it first aired 16th of March 1992. James, what is this one all about?
The Enterprise is called in to render assistance to the Janai after one of their shuttles disappears down a weird space hole. Riker works closely with a member of their species, Soren, and they become close. The Janai are gender neutral and regard other species as more primitive. However, Soren confides in Riker that they identify as female, but it is forbidden on her planet and regarded as a sickness, and if anyone finds out, they will be sent to conversion therapy. There are many discussions about gender roles, makeup, and Riker's genitals, which probably made this a fun watch with the family at tea time. When Riker and Soren kiss in the gardens, their relationship is discovered and Soren is taken away. Riker attempts to intervene and considers breaking the Prime Directive to do so. Following a rescue attempt, he is rejected as it's too late and he returns to the Enterprise, a little sadder than he was before.
Well, Alex, you've never seen this one before. I want you to tell me about your sexual organs.
Yeah, I mean, the experience of watching it was kind of akin to going to an elderly relative's house and hearing them start to talk about the old days and just having that fear that at any moment it's going to slip into something incredibly offensive. I think, and I reserve the right to reassess this as we go on, that for the most part it did okay. A few clumsy slips, but I feel that overall it was on message, I think.
I remember this one, and I would say it's one I tend to avoid on a rewatch, because in my head it's a kind of, oh, it's an issue show, they're very much doing the issue of the week, which is probably something that they've said in the past that they would avoid because it's better that the stories arise from the situation rather than trying to write a story around an issue. And I'm not sure if they quite pulled this off. Actually, it's better than I remember, because, you know, it's got an okay, probably a fairly by the numbers science fiction plot. Character stuff's interesting enough. I think there's some choices in the episode. It's all very well intentioned, and that's good. It is not really saying anything particularly wrong. Is it very dated? I don't know. It is of its time, and it is making an attempt at something. I don't think it does anything wrong, which is great. That something from 1992, you can still say, well, it sort of holds up in terms of the issue. Does it hold up in terms of it being an entertaining episode of television?
But what exactly is the issue that they're trying to tackle? Because I think that their intentions and what they end up producing is very different. I think time has been kind to it in that sense, because the issue that they end up accidentally tackling is, you know, it's a far better issue episode in that sense, but their intention was to make an episode about homophobia.
Yeah.
But what they ended up doing was an episode about transphobia, which didn't even exist as a concept in the 1990s, really.
Yeah, it plays very differently, I think, today than it probably did at the time. I mean, despite it being fixed on an androgynous species and the idea of what gender you affiliate with, I think it's reasonably clear. You're right that what they're trying to drive at is a sense of homophobia, and certainly with the essentially what's the metaphor for gay conversion therapy. It just happens that all of that, of course, translates to the other issue transphobia, which is more relevant as we are now, which is a depressing state of affairs that it's so applicable from one to the other. But I mean, that's also quite telling, really, for today.
I think in the positive front, you can say that this is a story that they were trying to do about homophobia, but it wasn't a fear of AIDS plot, which was, I guess, the go-to in the 90s. It is a personal story. It is a love story, almost, but it gets some points for not being the most basic go-to thing that you could do for the drama. And I think it is something worth doing in the Star Trek way. The fact that they didn't consider, well, this gender thing might be controversial at some point is incredible. I think it would be, while this episode exists and is probably forgotten about or not really spoken about, like, I think if you made this episode today, there probably would be outcry and bros on the internet saying, not my Star Trek, having never watched Star Trek.
Oh, 100%. If this was an episode of Discovery or Strange New Worlds or anything, the knives would be out immediately.
Which I think it's fair to say there's a fair few episodes of Star Trek that if modern Star Trek did it would read in a different way to a lot of a more modern audience. I say modern audience, I mean a more regressive audience.
The kind of people that, without any sense of irony, immediately log on to Twitter or Facebook and post, "When did Star Trek go woke?" I don't think 1960 something.
Before the first episode aired would be the answer to that. A woman in trousers. So I guess let's talk about the science fiction plot. There's an invisible hole in space which sucks in electromagnetic energy and leads to a void. Does that intrigue you? Does that draw you into this plot?
Well, it's a lovely way of saving money on the sets, isn't it? Any time you might be concerned about the budget, anytime you've got to build a planet set, an invisible problem that you have to solve is very much the most budget-saving version.
Although you say that, the shuttle bay, though, with that giant shuttle prop, I thought that was lovely. I enjoyed that immensely, just seeing this great big, full-size 5-metre prop, which is, in many ways, a little bit clunky, but you could just walk around that. Would you do that these days? Would you get to walk around the shuttle? Yes, the Orville has the exact same thing. Just ignore me. But, that as a set was nice. I think especially when there's been around this bit of the season, it's felt a little bit bottly. So, I mean, here at least you have a fairly significant guest cast and some guest, if reused, sets.
Oh, it's very much got that Ramada Holiday Inn sort of feel to it that all of the guest planets do. But it's fine. As you say, sometimes it's just nice to be off the ship, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you can go to a garden, which is in the studio. That's fine. In the dark. That's a lovely location.
Do you want to see these plants, Commander? Yeah, these look very familiar to what we have on Earth. They're alien plants. Do not question it.
I like that they said, first it turns white and then it turns blue, but right now it's green. Very standard right now. It does stuff, trust me. It definitely does. Yeah, I mean, what do you think of the choice of Riker to carry this particular plot? I was reading an article on TrekCore about it, and they said making Riker, who ostensibly is a fairly shallow character who would chase the attractive woman, who is probably the character you would say enjoys a lot of casual relationships, making the kind of this story, which is gay coded, built around him. He's not necessarily the right character for that. Do you think that's right?
I would disagree a little bit. I think that you kind of see Riker as a character who would, in terms of his choice of partner, would play into a lot of gender norms. So even though they do cast women for, well, near enough all of the Janai. The fact that he's fallen for somebody who's basically displaying gender-neutral traits, I think helps you carry the message.
Yeah, I suppose in many ways having your main Lothario be the character that is presented as... Riker has no issue here. Why do you, as an audience, have an issue? It's maybe not the most obvious one to go for, but I think it's a legitimate route.
I mean, Jonathan Frakes has gone on record as well. He said they should have been braver and cast a man as Soren. Do you think that would have made it too on the nose, perhaps, for the time, or do you think that even really matters?
I don't think it matters now, but I think it mattered then. With regards to what their intentions were at the time in comparison to how we perceive it now.
I think if you were doing it now, hiring anything other than a non-binary actor would be a misstep. For the time, it's difficult to say. On one hand, yes, I think he's correct. It would sort of have made the episode a bit more sort of, sit up and pay attention, they're taking this seriously. But on the other hand, given the time, you don't want it to come off... I'm trying to choose my words carefully. I wouldn't want them to do it badly and it be treated by certain audience members as farcical, because then that would be regressive for what they were trying to achieve. And I don't know that I have entire confidence in the production at the time to have gotten the nuance of that correct.
And the production team at the time just wouldn't have allowed it anyway. This is a production team who had somebody come down, some sort of executive had to come down to ensure that there were not two men holding hands in the background.
For the time, I think it's probably... I think it's fine.
They probably pushed it as far as they could, really, given the restrictions placed on them by some people involved in the show, naming no names, Rick Berman.
You just randomly said Rick Berman there. I don't know where that came from. You have the other characters, I guess, as mirrors here to discuss the gender roles, and I guess you have that early discussion with Riker where he's an alpha male and it's like, what kind of women are you attracted to? And I was like, any of them, it's fine, I don't mind. And they explain that different people are attracted to different types. It's actually interesting here that there is that sort of gender binary. They don't say, well, some men like men and some women like women, which gives me echoes of Gene Roddenberry, obviously. But and then you've got, I suppose, Crusher as the conventional woman who likes wearing makeup, and they talk about attracting a mate. And then you've got Worf, who goes a bit sort of men are men and women are women, and
at least Worf knows what a woman is. Exactly.
He's got a Twitter account all about it.
You don't want to look at his Substack subscriptions. It's just toxic.
But actually, on that, I know we're skipping ahead a little bit. That's why it's so effective when it's Worf joining Riker at the end.
Yeah, I mean, it's set up and payoff, isn't it? It's just like, I mean, there's nothing there to suggest. It's just like, well, Worf's got to know them, or he's got to respect the relationship, or I guess it's just that inherent, I respect Riker, and if you're going to fight, I'm going to fight with you. Fine, I feel they could have maybe done a little bit more with that, giving him an actual arc, which he gets the setup of, I'm not sure about this, to, well, I'm fully supportive of this, without really doing any work.
I think it speaks to his character. He doesn't necessarily need an arc, because he doesn't grow as a character here. It's just the way he is. He doesn't understand why certain people want to question gender roles, and he'll speak out against that, but at the same time he will respect that some people find it important. It is like that elderly relative who will say he doesn't understand why everything is woke, but then at the same time will be very respectful to people who are different. The non-racist who still reads the Daily Mail for some reason. That type of person, I kind of feel.
You also have Picard in this episode in full-on, not a character, but is just a boss kind of thing, talking about the Prime Directive. Very much just, well, you can't do anything about this. It's an impossible scenario. Here I am, devil's advocate. Now, don't go down to the planet and risk your career. Maybe go down to the planet. I don't know. But don't. It's against the Prime Directive or something, maybe. I don't know what this planet is. Are they warp capable? Why are we even helping them? I think they must be. They know all about shuttles and stuff. But they're just sort of random. We got a distress call. I don't know how the episode got started. It just did. Don't ask too many questions.
It's definitely a scene we've had elsewhere in other episodes. The Captain, I'm faced with a terrible dilemma. Yes, you're right. It is difficult. Well, goodbye. Save 5 minutes there.
He knows what Riker wants to do. He goes into that basically just trying to convince him to push him into a certain direction. Picard isn't trying to convince him not to do it. He just knows that Riker is going to do it. He just wants to remind him of what is at stake, really.
Just got to put it on the record as your boss that don't do this, okay? We're not going to ban you from the transporter, keep you on board. I'm not bothered about risking a diplomatic incident. It's fine. We have to get to the end of this episode anyway, so let's just move on. But I'm not going to help you in any way.
It's only ever with these high stakes that we see it, but I do wonder if sometimes, he has the same conversations for much lower issues, sort of, well, number one, if you don't want to attend the Christmas drinks, I fully understand, but honestly, I can't secure you your annual bonus.
Think of all you've worked for, Will.
But does the Prime Directive not still apply? If they're not members of the Federation, then it doesn't matter if they're warp capable or not.
Yeah, I mean you can't interfere.
You would assume they are warp capable, yeah. Because we had the same situation in Half a Life where they were clearly a warp capable species, but they couldn't interfere.
They just don't want the paperwork.
They're a paperless ship. But I wonder how much paperwork they do actually have to do. Do you think Worf just spends most of his time just like filling in health and safety forms for all of his away missions?
I mean, you always know when they're busy because there's like 60 different pads piled up on their desks. The single function pads, that's the future, and you just pass them around the ship. But before we move on to, I guess, the main plot, the poker game. Oh, wild cards. That's a bit womanly, isn't it? Wouldn't catch me playing a game of wild cards. Is that the best metaphor, do you think? Like, ultimately, you're still playing cards.
This is very much one of those areas where I had clenched teeth. At least it was reasonably brief. I'm trying to think, was that the worst for that? Or no, maybe that was the earlier part when was it earlier? I can't remember where it came with Riker basically going, aren't set genders great? They're fantastic. Being a man is brilliant. At that point, I had a very clenched arse at the prospect of what was to come. But
also, when he accidentally says he, and there's no he's or she's. I was like, I can't think of another pronoun that would be neutral.
God, yeah, that was really weird. I realise why they used what do you want me to say? It. But it did make me very uncomfortable, and I realised that was the point. But again, this is another one of those things where I think these years later it views particularly differently.
Well, I mean, I guess our generation, we're told, invented pronouns, so there you go, proof.
Although, obviously, that would be equally offensive then as it is now. That language somehow feels more weaponised in 2023 because there are obviously a large share of bad faith actors that are deliberately trying to rile people up with this sort of stuff. And it was a conversation I was having earlier that I'm aware of these sorts of languages happening. I feel that the open, naked homophobia and transphobia that's presented in so much media that we consume is very prevalent now, and it's different. It's not so much used as a subject of a joke. It's now, not that that's in any way correct, but it's now very aggressive, and certainly using that term of it calls in mind to me when I've been out and about and heard people using that as a derogatory term.
But I think Riker is coming across as somebody who's just ignorant and wanting to learn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, no, as I say, obviously it's done deliberately. I think the reason it's sparking something on me is that where it's an issue that the general public, say, cared not to think about so much 30 years ago. Now there's a lot of quite gammony types who are having to think about it for the first time and are reacting very badly.
You'd imagine it's like the people 30, 40 years ago who had to think of homosexuality for the first time. It's just, it is history repeating itself.
It's exactly the same, yeah. And history will not be kind on them.
That's another 1-star iTunes review for us.
I liked this Star Trek podcast until it went woke.
What do you think of the relationship between Riker and Soren? Do you think they give enough time to it? Do you think it's built up enough? The denouement is "I love you," which is that too much at that point? For my money, I don't know if they've earned that, but I think certainly the scene with Troy where they have the discussion that there's someone else in my life, which seems to me as, you were my last serious relationship, I'm now moving on. That was the idea of that, so to give that a little bit more weight, but it doesn't quite feel completely earned to me.
The only part that I felt was particularly off was, yes, that I love you at the end. It's been, a matter of a few days? The sort of jump to, what would you describe, lust? That feels the wrong description maybe, but I feel that jumping point when you're essentially dealing with repression perhaps isn't so unbelievable. But yeah, the Riker jumping to "I love you" after 4 days smacks of your teenage boyfriend.
Do you think it would, if it was, take away the plot and just say it's an episode about Riker falling in love with somebody, if it was, a beautiful woman, would that feel like it works? Not necessarily. I mean, I'm not saying that in bad faith. Just, is it the fact that it's somebody who wouldn't fall into what we perceive as a partner for Riker, that it doesn't feel like somebody he could fall in love with so quickly? It's not Minuet.
For me personally, I would have the same dispute, whoever it is. I feel it's underwriting a character to try and sort of jump to that point. It wouldn't really make a difference. It might to certain sections of the audience, but hopefully those people won't be around very long.
Does the desperation of the circumstances?
Oh, I see what you mean. Does it sort of accelerate things? Possibly.
Suddenly someone you have feelings for, and then they're in this desperate situation, and you want to save them from it.
I suppose at that point it comes down to how believable you think that is of the particular character rather than the situation, perhaps.
Yeah, and James, I completely see what you're saying. Am I just bringing biases into that? And if it had been what we perceive as Riker's type, and they'd done exactly the same things, would that make a difference? It's an interesting question.
I'm not saying that you're perceiving it in any kind of negative way. I just think that because of the way Riker has been portrayed in the past, this is a non-standard relationship for him.
I think one other take on it is that if it was, say, a Minuet character and the same was said, I think you would not necessarily take it as a fully believable statement, rather than him saying something to get his leg over. Whereas in this, I believe more strangely that it is a genuine sentiment. I just think it's the way it's written is a bit off on the time scale, but circumstances, 6 of one, half a dozen of another.
We're at a different character. Say it was Geordie, who we've seen is love-starved and never makes a connection with another person. If it was, say, him, would that then be more believable? Because you think, yeah, he could fall in love this quickly. Maybe because he's not as cynical, or because he's not as experienced. Would that make more sense?
I think I'd read it like a teenage boy in their with their first girlfriend saying, "I love you. I can't bear to not be with you. You can't go to a different university."
But exactly that. It's like, is Riker not a bit more world weary than that to even say that?
But it is a desperate situation at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
He knows what has already happened to her.
Yeah.
Don't even know. I mean, she's gone under conversion therapy, so should I even be? And she says that she's happy with it, so should I even be using those pronouns?
The ending, because you have
it's
to
bleak as hell.
Well, it starts right in Next Generation, so we know you have to end the episode, which is not ideal, but it is then, well, I've been through the therapy and I'm fine. I don't know how I thought that way before. I was wrong. I was indeed sick. And obviously, it's in no way any endorsement of that particular course of action.
I thought that was a fantastic ending. I think it's perfect for the story. I mean, she discussed it earlier in the episode that that friend that stood up in front of the class and said that he was cured, and she's done exactly the same thing. You know that there's sadness in her eyes. She deep down knows that this conversion therapy hasn't worked. She wants to live as a woman, but society will not allow it.
Yeah, I mean, it is set up well, and it is bleak, and it's sad, and it's tragic.
You couldn't have ended it on a happy note with this message. It would be to really undersell everything else that you've tried to do. You need to have that, let's be honest, that sort of 1984 type ending. The state has won, for that message to have any impact. And
spoilers for 1984.
And it's important to confront people with the realities of it. I mean, as we record this episode today, one of the most read stories on BBC News is a story talking about whether schools should introduce policies for dealing with transgender children. And the story is headed up by an anonymous parent talking about how their child had approached them, saying that they wished to go by a different name, and that the parent then rushed to speak to the school to discover that the school, this was already known and they were already doing it in school. And then the parent going through in detail saying, and I was disgusted that the school would do this without me knowing. And then goes on to give themselves away by saying, If I'd known, I would have discussed it with my child. I would have made them go for multiple meetings with medical practitioners to really see if this was really what they wanted to do before they made any drastic decisions that altered the course of their life forever. You're the problem. You are exactly the reason that the school had to do what they did and not tell you. Because you would push your child into exactly the same situation that happened at the end of this episode. And I genuinely don't think that people are confronted with the realities of what they suggest, because it's such an easy thing to jump to. Oh, but they don't know. They're not sure on things. They need time. They need time to consider. Well, they don't necessarily have time to consider. But it's very easy to make those kind of statements when it's not your life and you don't have to think about it. Realistically, the only way people will be confronted with these kind of dilemmas is through media like this. And you therefore need that kind of bleak and sad ending to make anyone consider it. If you'd ended with a happy message, all of these people that need to be confronted with this would have learnt nothing at the end of it. They would walk away not considering the issue.
Do you think that there are transphobic people who watch this episode and they think, oh, well, thank God it had a happy ending?
I mean, the sad reality is that yes. Let's be perfectly honest about this. We know only too well. You only have to log into Twitter. I refuse to call it by its stupid name. God knows what it'll be by the time this episode comes out. You only have to log in to see that a lot of people would consider the end of this. Oh, well, it's great. Yeah, no, they're living a lie. Yes, so it's a happy ending. They absolutely would, and they're so far down a rabbit hole of. Well, I was trying to find a different word from hate, but it is a rabbit hole of hate. Let's be perfectly honest, and so blinded in it that they would. And again, you only have to, as we say, this is an episode that's clearly not dealing with that issue. Really, it's dealing with homophobia at the time, but you only have to look at the way that people reacted to homophobia at the time and see there would have been plenty of people that would have considered that a good outcome in that issue at the time. So it sadly translates perfectly.
This is actually an element of the episode which really is effective in their original intention, because gay conversion therapy, I mean, it's still a big issue today, really. And weirdly, one of the things that it made me think about was the musical The Book of Mormon, because I went to see it a few months ago, and there's a character in that who's undergone conversion therapy, and it's almost as if everyone just knows conversion therapy doesn't really work. You know, we can make jokes about it, but there are still this small subset of people who insist on putting people through it. You know, this episode is from 1992. They know that conversion therapy is just nonsense. They can say that then, but it's still something that goes on today. It is ridiculous. But that is one area where I think the ending overall, I think, is actually perfect. The only other way you could end it is by having Soren kill herself.
Just to add one other element in about that ending as well, that I feel the right decision was made. You could have had the happy ending without it being fully happy. That was one direction they could have gone in, which is that they grant her asylum, but it doesn't end up with Riker and her together. And at one point I did think it was going to go that way, and I'm very glad it didn't, because again, it's important to confront people and not give an easy solution, because I hate any time any issue, like whether it be anything from something incredibly serious like this to just differing views on politics, that typical right-wing answer of, if you don't like it, then leave. Because it's not practical. It's not realistic. And ultimately, why should you have to? And I would have been a bit offended if it had gone down that route. I'm very glad that they didn't use that, because it would have been lazy. It would have been a get out.
I guess it's sort of a very Star Trek device. The courtroom speech, the pleading case, the statement of identity. Do you think that's effective? Do you think it's too on the nose, or do you think the way that conclusion is structured, do you think that makes the case and then therefore makes the ending all the more heartbreaking or tragic?
I like that it's on the nose. I actually like it when Star Trek isn't afraid to just say what it means. There's famous episodes from the original series like Devil in the Dark, which isn't afraid to kind of wear its heart on its sleeve. I think this is a great example of that.
Well, let's say some other stuff in Quickfire.
Quickfire.
Keeping with the themes of the episode, Geordie has a beard.
Very strong. 10 on 10.
Thank you very much. Some behind-the-scenes quotes. Michael Pillar said, Roddenberry had been barraged by letters which had discussed with us before his death the possibility of having two men hold hands in some scene. However, neither Pillar nor Rick Berman felt that this was an appropriate way to handle the matter. Berman commented, "We'd been spending a lot of time wrestling with all the elements of the requests of the gay community for us to involve a gay character in the show. It got a lot of publicity, both good and bad. We wrestled with a lot of different stories and came up with a very obvious metaphor to the gay community and the intolerance they receive on this planet." A great commitment to the cause there from Rick Berman. A lot of wrestling.
And another comment from Rick Berman. He said, having Riker engaged in passionate kisses with a male actor might have been a little unpalatable to viewers. Which is why they had a female actor play Soren.
Jesus Christ.
So Jonathan Frakes said, I didn't think they were gutsy enough to take it where they should have. Soren should have been more obviously male. We've gotten a lot of male in the episode, but I'm not sure it was as good as it could have been if they were trying to call it a gay episode. Brandon Braga, in response to that, said, if it would have been a man playing the role, would he have kissed him? I think Jonathan would have, because he's a gutsy guy.
Right, brace yourselves. Turning to the problematic prose of the Nitpicker's Guide. Some episodes I'd lead this up with a prelude to sort of build to a punchline. I think on this one, I'm just going to read you the text straight. I think this needs to be just heard as is. So, plot oversights. When Riker and Soren discuss mating, Soren says that both persons in the couple inseminate a fibrous husk, which then serves as an incubator. The dialogue seems to indicate that the mixing of the seminal fluids replaces the function of a sperm and the egg in the gender-separate races. Open brackets, I do not wish to be indelicate, but it is necessary to examine the line of reasoning that the dialogue evokes and follow it through to its probable conclusion. Close brackets. My question is, what sort of genitalia does Soren have? If Soren... This isn't even what I'm getting to. If Soren can inseminate a husk, she probably has an inseminator. That is in quotations. This makes sense, actually. Human androgynous children usually have external male genitalia. The presence of the Y chromosome ensures this, even though their multiple X chromosomes may create internal female genitalia as well. Has Riker thought this through? He acts like he's ready to spend the rest of his life with Soren. Yet I never pictured him as a man willing to marry a small-breasted boy. Now we often have a laugh with the Nitpicker's Guide. Often have a little bit of a joke about Phil's intentions. Often just for the sake of a laugh. But I think on this occasion, you, Phil Farrand.
The poker game here reveals the founding year of the United Federation of Planets with Federation Day, which is 2161, and we'll get more of that in Enterprise. Well, that's us done for another episode. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back again soon talking about cause and effect. We hope you'll join us for that one. Goodbye.
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 They didn't let him have a beard. He wanted one. And they only let him have a beard when it was his wedding and in a couple of the films.
I mean, I think it looks good. Smart beard.
Why wasn't he allowed a beard? Did they think people would mix him up with Riker?
No, Geordie's the one with the visor.
But Riker's the blind one, right?